This morning, I want to go to 1 Kings 20. Who knows what 1 Kings 20 is? Not Danny. Not you don't count, sorry. I mean, you count, but you're not allowed to answer the question. No, it's the next. That's the one before. 1 Kings 20 is when the Syrians wanted Israel's to hand over their gold and their silver and their wives and their servants. Ben-Hadad wanted all their stuff. 1 Kings 20. So we're going to go slow with the reading here, and I'm going to kind of interact, and we're going to make sure that, we have the scene. We understand the scene here. So the scene here, if you look at the chapter before, 1 Kings 19, that was the chapter when Elijah was very discouraged, and he went out and said, he's the only one left. Even I am left, and they seek my life. And so he asked God to take it away. So that was the chapter before. And the chapter before that was the victory on Mount Carmel. So now chapter 18 is victory on Mount Carmel, when fire came down and licked up the altar and all the water on God's altar. And prophets of Baal their altar was a failure. And so there was a big victory that day for God. And then 19, Elijah was discouraged. Chapter 20 is nothing about Elijah, but I just went back there to give you a little bit of a reference to what time we're in and what was all going on. 1 Kings 20 is very unusual, in my opinion. And let's start reading it, and then I'll kind of share those points as we get to it. Verse 1, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, gathered all his hosts together, and there were 32 kings with him, and horses and chariots, and he went up and besieged Samaria and warred against it. Now, Samaria was Israel. Are you following me? Samaria was capital of Israel. And so Syria was, I think it was an adjoining kingdom right beside Israel, which it still is today, actually, on the map. And so the king of Syria warred against Israel. And he sent messengers to Ahab, king of Israel, into the city, and said unto him, Thus saith Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad was the king. So Ben-Hadad said, Thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives also, and thy children, even the best, the goodliest, are mine. And who was the king of Israel? Ahab. And the king of Israel answered and said, O Lord, O king, my lord, O king, according to thy saying, I am thine and all that I have. Does that sound like Ahab? No, this is awful. He was king, and a neighboring king said that he wants his silver, his gold, his wives, and his children. And the king said to the enemy king, My lord, O king, according to thy saying, I am thine and all that I have. What a passive attitude. Verse 5, and the messengers came again and said, Thus saith Ben-Hadad, which is the king, saying, Although I have sent unto thee, saying, Thou shalt deliver me thy silver, thy gold, and thy wives, and thy children. Yet I will send my servants unto thee tomorrow about this time, and they shall search thy house and the houses of thy servants, and it shall be whatever is pleasant in thine eyes, they shall put it in their hand and take it away. So he added to the first. He got an agreement for the first. Then he added to what he wanted. Now, if I read that, I'm saying, well, what did you add to it? But he obviously added to what he wanted to take for himself out of their kingdom. Then the king of Israel called all the elders of that land and said, Mark, I pray you, and see how this man, Ben-Hadad, seeketh mischief, which means harm, for he sent unto me for my wives and for my children and for my silver and for my gold, and I denied him not. And all the elders and all the people said unto Ahab, hearken not unto Ben-Hadad, nor consent. Therefore Ahab said unto the messengers of Ben-Hadad, tell my lord the king, all that thou didst send for to thy servant at the first I will do, but this thing I may not do. And the messengers departed and brought him word again. Then Ben-Hadad, in verse 10, sent unto him and said, the gods do so unto me, and more also, if the dust of Samaria may suffice for handfuls for all the people that follow me. Verse 11, and the king of Israel answered and said, tell him, let not him that girdeth on his harness boast himself as he putteth it off. So verse 10 and 11, there is now a war being created, starting to form, because Ahab was going to just give in and give the king what he wants, but then he didn't feel good about it. And in verse 8, he asked the elders of the people, which was Israel, what they think. And they said, no, don't hearken to that king. Don't do it. And so now, what happens next? A war. Verse 12, and it came to pass when Ben-Hadad heard this message, as he was drinking, he and the kings in the pavilions, that he said unto his servants, set yourself in array, and they set themselves in array against the city. And behold, there came a prophet unto Ahab, king of Israel, saying, thus saith the Lord, hast thou seen this great multitude? Behold, I will deliver it into thine hand this day, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Now, who was Ahab? Let's stop here for a moment. Yeah. Was he a good king? How bad was he? Like, rating from the rest of the kings? Yeah. In 1 Kings 16, verse 30, it says, Ahab did evil more than all those before him. This is what for man we're talking about. So make sure you realize, you establish that this was not a good king. This was a king that was more evil than all those that were before him. And yet the prophet came unto the king Ahab of Israel and said, I will deliver it, meaning the army of Syria, into thine hand. And then Ahab said, what did he say next? Somebody tell me, verse 14. He said, by whom? Why did he say by whom? He had no confidence that he can do it. He knew he wasn't walking in the ways of the Lord. He knew that he wasn't right with God. And so here there was a prophecy that the enemy is going to be defeated. And he goes, by whom? He was the king. He was the charge. He was the man in charge. And the prophet said, thus saith the Lord, even by the young men of the princes of the provinces. And then what did Ahab say next? He said, by who shall order the battle? He there was good reasons he didn't have confidence in himself. And the prophet said, thou. Then he numbered the young men of the princes of the provinces, and there were about 232. And after them he numbered all the people, even all the children of Israel, being 7,000. Verse 16. And they went out at noon, but Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the pavilions, he and the kings, the 32 kings that helped him. So verse 17, 18, and 19, they face each other off in battle. Verse 20, and the Israelites slew everyone his man, and the Syrians fled. I'm not sure how the battle was ordered, but verse 20 says, and they slew everyone his man, and the Syrians fled, and Israel pursued them. Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, escaped on a horse with the horsemen. And the king of Israel went out and smote the horses and the chariots and slew the Syrians with a great slaughter. So that battle was over. The army of the Israelites won. And in verse 22, the prophet came to the king again and said, go, strengthen thyself and mark and see what thou dost. For at the return of the year, the king of Syria will come again to thee. Now, the reason the king of Syria came again explains in verse 23. The Syrians had a discussion among themselves, and they said, verse 23, that their gods, the gods of Israel, are the gods of the hills. Therefore, they were stronger than we are. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we will be stronger than they. So they had this idea that it was because of the location of the battle that they lost. And the gods of Israel are the gods of the hills. But the next battle, because our gods are the gods of the plains, we're going to have another battle in the plains. And it came to pass, in 25, they got their army ready. 26, and it came to pass at the return of the year that Ben-Hadad numbered the Syrians and went up to fight against Israel. And the children of Israel were numbered and were all present and went against them. The children of Israel pitched before them like two little flocks of kids. And the Syrians filled the country. That's a pathetic battle scene. The children of Israel were like two little flocks of kids, and the Syrians filled the country. Verse 28, there came a man of God and spoke unto the king of Israel and said, thus says the Lord, because the Syrians have said, the Lord God is God of the hills, but he is not God of the valley. Therefore I will deliver all this great multitude into thine hand, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. Verse 29, and they pitched one over against the other, and so it was that on the seventh day the battle was joined, and the children of Israel slew the Syrians 100,000 footmen in one day. But the rest fled to Aphek, into the city, and there a wall fell on 27,000 of the men that were there. And Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city, into the inner chamber. Why did the children of Israel win this battle? Somebody tell me.
The powerful hand of God.
Exactly, but be more specific. Why did God do it?
Because they were challenging him.
Yeah. It wasn't about how right the king was. Was there another reason that it happened, you think? I think there's two reasons. That's the first one, what Rudy said. Yeah. But why did he do it if they had an evil king?
That all Israel would know that God is the Lord. Is that right?
Yeah. What my second reason for it, go ahead. Those are all very good reasons. I mean, I'm probably the one that stands out to me and is in the beginning of the chapter. Verse 8, I believe it was because of the voice of the people. The king was evil, and he was passive, but the elders were not. Verse 8, it says, all the elders and all the people said, hearken him not, don't give in to him. So my belief is it was the voice of the people was a big reason that the Israelites won, that God showed himself strong. And the other reason was the Syrians mocked God and said he's not the God of the valley. We are. He's maybe the God of mountains, but we're in control of the valley. To me, those are the two biggest reasons they won that battle. Go ahead, Jake. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a reason I picked this chapter out today. When I read this chapter for the first time and I seen what I'm seeing now, it gave me the ability to, it helped me to process governments and political situations better. So I'll take this book here. In this book, what happened or did not happen in the history part of this book through the Old Testament was what God's people did or did not do. That formed the history of this book. For example, God's people came to the promised land because of what they did do. God's people ended up in Babylon because of what they did not do. The history of this book was not made because of what the Philistines did or did not do. I mean, that's woven in here, but the gist of this book is what God's people did or did not do is what created the writings of this book. If you take a history book out of school, what you learn from 1 to 8, you take that book, and I never applied it to that book till the last 5 years. When I take a history book that we read in school, I think the same way. That history book, I believe now, the results of that book are because of what God's people did or did not do. More than what I used to believe. I used to believe that book was written because this army was more powerful than this army and such and such and such and such. I now believe it has more to do with what God's people were praying, pressing in for, and doing than who was the strongest and the better of the army. So this chapter here has a couple of things that really are valuable as we process, to me, and possibly to more of you as we process, for example, if God uses a person, a king, or a president, it doesn't mean that president is saved or born again, or that his ways are God's ways. It simply means God used him. It gives you that, it broadens your, you can shelf it better. Just because God uses someone doesn't mean you follow that person. If you don't have that slot, then you get yourself in trouble. You see God use someone, and then you think, well, apparently he's walking with God, and I'm going to do what he does too. No, you should have the ability to see it. Okay, God used him, but I'm not following him. Verse 8, it says, where the people and all the people and the elders said no. I believe that had a huge thing to do with the result of this battle. Brother Yun from China said that the prayers of the believers in China is the reason God came through. After World War II, there was a revolution in the Chinese government. And according to the books that Brother Yun wrote, there was between 100 and 200,000 believers in China. That's not very many. That is really, really, really small amount. Yeah. He said, we had 150,000 prayer going like laser beams up to heaven. And he believes that is why China, the church growth in China, and the miracles and the manifestations and the healings and things I've seen, he believes that was a direct connection. And I agree with him. So you can look at all history events like that if you want to. I like history. And so ever since I was a schoolboy, I would read history about Revolutionary War, and I would try to figure out, so the American forces and the British forces were both killing each other on the battlefield. But the Americans won because they were the godly people. So that's what the history book would teach you. And I just would always just like stall out at that point. Finally, I came to the point, I believe America and why God allowed America to form and to be a country like it is, like the history book reads about, is because of God's people, the prayers of God's people, the persecuted believers that were crying out for years for a place to live, where they would not get their head chopped off when they wanted to serve the king. I believe that is why America got formed. I believe World War II, the results of World War II were because of God's people. I believe that God looked upon the Jews and said, no, I am not going to allow the Jews to be slaughtered. And he allowed another king to rise up against that king, took him out. That's what I believe. I'm not trying to change your convictions this morning, but I am trying to give you this thing where can you broaden your view of why things happen, why they happen? Can you broaden your view and see what God's people do or don't do still affects the history that is being written today? So this story about Ahab is really unusual because all the rest of the Ahab stories are horrible. He got killed just a couple chapters after this chapter for being so evil.